Hello everybody, welcome to episode 164 of Show Free, where today we'll be going over the dungeon exploration arc of Black Clover. So we see this arc starts off as Asta is specifically requested to go on a mission by the Wizard King himself. He sent in a request to the Black Bulls. So we see as Asta, Luck, and Noelle prepare to go on this adventure to a dungeon. And we just see that a dungeon really is just a big complex that has some treasure at the end of it. Nothing too special and nothing too different from the average idea of a dungeon. But yeah, so ultimately we see as they end up going along. And we then see as the story kind of plays out. We see as Asta and Noelle get there and Luck goes running off because he's like, you know what, I want to go find powerful people because Luck is kind of like your Kenpachi Zaraki's. He's just like, I want to fight people. And so I see he goes jumping off. He has electric magic, so he just goes jumping along with his electric boots that he has. But yeah, so, or lightning boots, whatever you want to call them. But yeah. So then after that, we see as Asta and Noelle are kind of looking around, and then ultimately they end up getting captured by this big plant, monster thing, and then ultimately it looks like it's about to get both of them. And then we see, in fact, as Golden Dawn, some of its members end up coming in and saving him. Now these members are Klaus, Mimosa, and Yuno. Obviously we know who Yuno is, and Mimosa has plant magic, and her and Noelle know each other because she grew up around the royal family, and Noelle is obviously royalty. But yeah, so we see that, and we also see Klaus, who has steel magic, and he kind of undermines Yuno and Asta because they are peasants, and he thinks lesser of them because of that. But ultimately, they end up getting saved and healed and everything. We see as they interact, and ultimately, what ends up happening is they end up going both their separate ways because they're like, we're going to get the treasure, no, we're going to get the treasure. So ultimately, we see as Asta and Noelle go searching, and then the Golden Dawn goes searching on their own. Because we see actually as Yuno makes this moving wind platform for them, and they go exploring. But yeah, so then after that, we see as Asta and Noelle are led along by Nero, which is Asta's little bird. And they end up heading towards this area. And once they get there, they're kind of searching about. But they ultimately end up running into someone who is also there searching. His name is Lotus. Now, Lotus is a warrior of a separate kingdom. Because when the Wizard King was discussing selecting Asta, we get to actually learn that the world of Black Clover is divided into at least two kingdoms that we know of. You have the Clover Kingdom, which obviously is the one we are in, and the Diamond Kingdom. Now, these two directly border each other, and this dungeon is in the center of the border, so it is very contested. So we see that he's in fact a renowned warrior from this team, and so at first we actually, they don't run into him first. We actually see as Luck runs into him first, because Luck was searching around and all that. And once Luck runs into him, we actually get to see as they start fighting, and Lotus has smoke abilities. And so him and Lotus are fighting, but Luck actually does pretty good for himself, but then ultimately it gets too much for him. And here we're just trying to get some background for Luck. We see that Luck was kind of I'd say almost mentally abused child, because his mom expected a lot of him, and she demeaned him because his magic wasn't up to par. But then ultimately, once he ended up going in and getting better at it, all he wanted to do was fight so he could I guess impress his mom, because at one point she just said win and keep winning, and that stuck with him, and it's still with him to this day, and that's why he loves fighting so much, because he wants to make his mom proud. But yeah, so we see this, and then ultimately while he's getting beaten, almost about to get fully beaten, we see as Asta ends up coming in, slashing the magic as he always does, and then Noelle also comes in as well. So we see here as they start to fight, and then ultimately it does end up going in Lotus's favor once more. However, during this, we see as he then enshrouds them like a big cloud of smoke, and after that, they end up using Luck's abilities to try and distract Lotus, because the smoke within it drained magic, and therefore no magic could escape it. So if Lotus started shooting magic, this dude could Lotus could detect magic within his smoke shroud. And as he was doing this, Luck was drawing his attention by throwing lightning bolts into the magic shroud. But because of this, Asta then cut through the smoke and got Lotus on the outside. But this ultimately ends up to lead to Lotus scurrying off and heading away. But during this, we actually see that the Golden Dawn has ran into a similar member of the same army who is far more powerful, by the name of Mars. And we actually see, as Lotus discusses him briefly, and apparently he's like the ultimate weapon of the Diamond Kingdom, and he derives from this horrific testing ceremony where all of the children in the class are trained together, and then ultimately they're forced to kill each other, and whoever comes out on top is the one who's made a warrior. And so we see that he kind of comes from a similar, test, kind of as Zabuza Momochi in Naruto, which honestly I really like that concept. Not in the way that sounds bad, but like the story building concept of that, like it's very horrific. So it's a very interesting concept to see people work with, and I bet Tabata was greatly inspired by the Zabuza story, because it's almost exactly the same as Zabuza's story, because Zabuza Momochi was a child who was raised in the land of water, or land of rain, whatever you call it, and then after that he had to train, and then ultimately had to kill all of his peers to become the wielder of the blade he was. But yeah, so we see as they're fighting them, and they are not doing great against Mars. Mars has these like ice abilities, and they're really unable to do anything against him. He's very, well attuned to his abilities. And we see that even Yuno is unable to beat him. So during that, ultimately, we see as they end up getting beat pretty bad. We see as Mimosa's having to do a lot of healing. And then ultimately, we see as Spark, Asta, and Noelle end up pulling up. Now, this is where kind of the tide changes for a bit, because we see as Asta goes right for that dude, and they start fighting, going crazy. But ultimately, after Asta beats him, we see as he is presumed, well, he's not really presumed dead, but he's presumed incapacitated. So we see as, oh crap, what's his name? Klaus ends up putting like this binding thing on him. They're like, yo, are you sure he's not gonna break out this? And he's like, yeah, it's fine. And so after that, we see us actually go into the treasure room, and they get us exploring about and all of that. And ultimately, during this time, we see as Yuno finds like this old scroll that he can't read, but ultimately ends up going into his grimoire. And we see as everything's just kind of going on, and then ultimately there ends up being a blast of ice through the wall again, and we see as in fact Mars was able to escape, and now he is imbued with what was his very closest friend's magical ability, which was like redeeming fire, kind of like a phoenix. And I believe it was specifically her. I believe her name was like Yana or something like that. And so he has now become embedded with this, because what had happened while he was in his little, experiment was that after he had killed all of his members, they ultimately ended up putting Yana's abilities in his grimoire, kind of making him like a hybrid grimoire, and this allowed him to then use her abilities, even though most magicians can only use one specific type of elemental ability with their grimoire. But yeah, so we see this, and he has become far more difficult to beat. Now we see as Asta going up against him, and Asta can't really do diddly because he is struggling to get through the flames. And we also see that in this first attack that Noelle was hit by the attack, and Noelle is being healed by Mimosa. So Asta is focused on beating Mars now, but he is unable to do so. And then ultimately, though, he is able to break through the healing flames on Mars, and this then leads to him getting incapacitated from a dire wound into his stomach, and he ends up falling out. And because of this, Yuno kind of starts freaking out. Yuno's like, you cannot die on me before going to what you could, reaching your limits. And so we see then as Yuno is trying to figure out what to do, but ultimately he can't figure out a move that will reach Mars before he's able to kill Asta. So we see as he's kind of freaking out, and then ultimately he just pulls something out of his grimoire, and it ends up being the ability that he had acquired recently. And it releases this little fairy thing, and it ultimately decimates Mars. And so we see as Mars is defeated and Asta is recovered, and we see that what's her name? Mimosa's having some difficulty healing Asta because she expended a lot of energy on healing Noelle, because Noelle did get a pretty grave wound. However, she didn't die, and we see that she's able to heal up Asta relatively well. But as they're trying to escape, we see that in fact the dungeon starts to crumble. And so during this, we see as they're all trying to escape, but ultimately Asta ends up pulling a Goku in the Saiyan Saga, and he's like, no, save the enemy. So they ultimately end up they don't end up saving Mars because they're unable to get him, but ultimately we see as Lotus, in fact, ends up saving Mars. Because Lotus got into this treasure vault while everything was going down, got some treasure, then got Lotus and got out of there. And so we see then as everyone ends up leaving, and we see as Asta, in fact, gets healed up a little bit, and everything's kind of good, everyone's chilling, and we see then as Klaus begins to openly admit his respect now of Yuno and Asta because of how powerful of mages they are, and that's all fine and dandy, I guess, because that's kind of where the arc ends. after Klaus kind of loses his prejudice and everyone ends up escaping the dungeon relatively healthy and in good condition. But yeah, that's all there really was for the dungeon exploration arc of Black Clover. I really enjoyed this arc. I liked it more than the Knight's entrance arc, not entrance exam arc. But yeah, it was super enjoyable, and I believe Black Clover is only going to get better from here because, oh, I forgot to mention a deep thing. Okay, so how Asta broke through the flame wasn't just with his normal grimoire. We actually see as his grimoire evolves. And he's now able to use magic, just not his own, because we see as Noelle, when she gets fully healed by Mimosa, before Asta ends up getting wounded, she is able to embed her water magic into Asta's grimoire because it evolved, and he's now able to cast through and break through the obviously fire magic of Mars. And that was really cool. Like, I do kind of dislike it because I didn't really want to see Asta use magic, but if it's in a voluntary method where someone else has to give their magic to him, then yeah, I'm okay with that. Because that was really cool, and I love to see how his blade evolved, because I wanted to see what type of transformations Asta was going to undergo, because, I mean, not Asta, but Asta, because it's shonen, you gotta have transformations, and I believe that is a great way to transform the character of Asta. So yeah, I cannot wait to see what else they do with his new grimoire. I'm ready to see what other new abilities his grimoire gets. So yeah, that's all it really was for the, dungeon exploration arc. And that's all I really have for episode 164 of Shelf Review. So thank you very much for watching.